No Sasquatch were harmed in the recording of this podcast.
Hi, I'm Robert Dominguez, former Bigfoot researcher, former paranormal investigator, and current Bigfoot Club podcaster.
I am joined by the one, the only Bigfoot Bob Dominguez of Bigfoot Club fame. Bobby, how you doing?
Matt, what's going on, buddy? I'm glad to be back on your show. Man, how many times have I been on your show?
Thousands.
It feels that way.
Once or twice, I think. But
yeah.
We talk all the time because we're best friends. So
yes, I guess it kind of like drowns that out, and I guess feels like we're always on a podcast all the time together. So.
Yeah, your podcast, you've started it back up again. How's that going?
It's going good. I'll say this, the only drawback is that Juan Valdez, one of my new co-hosts, he hasn't been able to make a couple podcasts, so we've had to go just me and Steven, and then I think Blair, Steven's wife, stepped in this last one, and we just talked shop, and so it's going good. I mean, I'm getting some decent downloads, so I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, I saw that. What was that recent milestone you reached?
33,000 downloads.
33,000.
So yeah, it's doing well. I mean, I'm not even pushing it that much. I'm not bragging here. I'm just saying.
Right.
I haven't pushed it that much, and it's still getting the downloads. So I'm pretty happy.
Well, as you know, I've been suffering from my own health issues recently, and haven't been able to put out any content. So I wanted to get back in the saddle, and I thought, hey, I'll grab Bob, and we'll just tackle one of the biggest questions in Bigfooting out there.
Yeah.
Where are all the Bigfoot bodies? Everybody always wants to know, all the skeptics, all the non-believers. They always ask, well, why hasn't anybody found a dead Bigfoot? Why hasn't bones been found?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great question. And I know from my experience, like from just like dealing with families and friends, that is the number one question people ask me all the time. You know, people who know me know that I'm into Bigfoot, and that's their number one question they ask me. Hey, Bob, how come we haven't found a body?
It seems to be the go-to question.
It is.
So there's a lot of possibilities out there. Mm-hmm. What some people may or may not be surprised to hear is that there's actually documented reports of people finding bodies and finding bones and everything else that you would question, why haven't they found? But they don't tend to make it to the public for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah, whenever I was reading that, I was kind of surprised that was that many. I mean, I had growing up and doing Bigfoot research with other Bigfoot researchers and reaching out and talking to them. You kind of hear stories like, hey, my cousin heard this. Hey, this park ranger, I heard this from a park ranger. Hey, I heard this from a game warden. You kind of hear those stories, and so when I was reading all those stories, I was really surprised how many there were. So yeah. It was kind of
there is quite a few that I had never heard before. Mm-hmm. Most of them, as a matter of fact. I had no idea there was that many. But like you, coming up through the ranks over the years, you do hear these stories. I remember one of the first things that I ever heard in relation to this was, I believe it was Eric Altman, if I remember correctly.
Good guy.
Yeah. I think that's who it was. It was a story coming out of Pennsylvania at the time. Mm-hmm. And supposedly someone had found or had in their possession what they believed to be a juvenile Bigfoot skull of some kind, or maybe an infant Bigfoot skull. But it was very hush-hush, couldn't really talk about it. we're looking more into it, and once we have all our ducks in a row, we'll release the information. And then just poof, you don't hear anything more about it.
They're gone.
They're gone. The story's gone, buried. No pun intended. Now, maybe that's because they looked into it more and realized it wasn't a Bigfoot skull. But a lot of this stuff just seems to disappear with no ending to it. Have you heard any stories like that where they just seem to vanish?
Yeah, I recall doing on my show, Bigfoot Club, I interviewed Luke Gross, and he was telling of a story in East Texas of a lady driving down this rural road. He didn't tell me exactly what road it was, but a lady was driving down a rural road and struck a Bigfoot, and the Bigfoot head and shoulders went through the windshield. And I believe she called like the local law enforcement. They came out, and then like some black vans showed up, and they just pulled the Bigfoot away and then took off, and no one knows what happened to the lady, where she's at, if she's okay. So he was telling me this story, and I was fascinated by it. But we weren't able to find who the person was, where it was at, but he had heard the story from another person. So I've heard something similar, something like that.
Well, on my show I did with Brenda Harris, the most recent one I've done with her, mm-hmm. She was talking about how a Bigfoot body was found buried in some rubble or something underneath some heavy rocks, and again some sort of dark government entity unknown to man like swooped in and sealed off the area and took the body and vanished.
Wow. I can believe it, because I know I've talked to you like off show before, Matt, about doing some research out in East Texas, and I was doing research in this one area, and then we kept going out to this one area, and game wardens and park rangers started just showing up. And we wouldn't tell anybody we're going to go out there, but they would just show up, and that stuff like that. I could believe that, that stuff happens behind the scenes that no one else sees or hears about.
It's just so weird because it seems to happen a lot in Texas. Mm-hmm. You're not the only person I've talked to that was doing research in Texas and had some sort of federal agency just show up out of nowhere. Like they knew they were there, knew why they were there, but they were asking a bunch of questions and kind of gave them some BS reason why they couldn't be in the area or something. And just an overall, attitude of, we don't want you here. Yeah.
Because I know I was out in area, what's the name of it? I can't think of the name of the area now for some reason. But it was, I went out to this one area, and a game warden came out. It was me and two other researchers. Game warden came out with us, and he knew we were doing Bigfoot stuff. I don't know how he knew, but he hung out with us until we left. Like we couldn't put any game cams out. We couldn't document anything because he was just hovering over us. So we just decided, you know what, we're just going to leave. So we ended up leaving. And I just, stuff like that. I don't know how he got that and how he found we were there, but it was just kind of odd.
Well, a former researcher and friend of ours, Chad Scott,
right,
claimed at one point that his house was actually broken into, and his computer and his Bigfoot cast and a sketchbook of Bigfoot and evidence he had collected was all missing, and nothing else in the house, nothing of value was taken. And then about a week later, the computer came back and some of the track castings came back, but the hard drive had been completely wiped of everything Bigfoot that he had on there. And they didn't return the sketch pad or whatever with his field notes and everything in it. You also hear stories I've heard from several people about just talking about Bigfoot on the phone back in the day. Strange vehicles would start driving by. Some even claimed helicopters would fly over their house, strange black helicopters. I don't know if there's something to that or not. Bigfoot people by nature tend to be paranoid a little bit, you know?
Yes.
So I don't know if it's just people being paranoid or what, but the federal agencies, the game wardens, whatnot, and who have you just randomly showing up in Texas when Bigfooters are going out to remote areas. It's happened too many times and witnessed by too many groups of people for me to just write it off. I mean, there's something to that. How they know who these people are, what they're doing out there, or when they're going to be out there and where they're going to be, I don't have any idea, but it kind of frightens me.
Yeah, I think back on it now, I was pretty lucky. I was pretty lucky to get out of there. And I think back all the stuff that I've dealt with, game wardens and park rangers, man, you know, because I know I've talked to like Native American affair officers, and they've openly, you know, tell me after like I turn off my tape recorder, there's Bigfoot out here all the time.
Yeah.
You know, and they admit it, but they won't go on the record on talking about it. And I know whenever I pulled out a tape recorder on game wardens and park rangers, they just don't even talk. They just refuse to talk about it.
Yeah. We had one park ranger down in south central Oklahoma that was open and would talk about it, knew what we were doing, would even tell us about sightings people had in the area. But then we've had others that just, y'all are crazy. There's nothing like that. Y'all need to move on. You can't be here.
Right.
You know, so it's not just they are telling you that the thing doesn't exist or, you know, whatever. They also want you to leave, which I always found really weird.
You know, they can't support unclassified animals, and I get it. But, you know, people are still seeing it stuff. I mean, people are seeing it, and it's in the area. I mean, if you know a Bigfoot's in the area, the people that live in that area know it's there. The park rangers just don't want to admit it because it is unclassified.
Right.
So, I mean, a quick story. Like when I was with the TBRC back in the day, our first annual Bigfoot conference, we had John Bennernagel was one of our guest speakers in it. And people know John Bennernagel. He's already passed away, but to me, he was one of the premier people who had a PhD that spoke out and supported Bigfoot. And I approached him, and like, I was just, at the time, even now I think this day I'm a nobody. And I walked up to him and asked him questions, and he pulled out a pad and a pen, started writing down whatever I was saying. And I asked him the question. I said, why don't we find Bigfoot bodies? And he sat there and just thought for a minute. And he goes, Robert, that's a good question. He goes, I've been a wildlife biologist for years. He goes, we know that there's grizzlies and there's brown bear. He goes, but I've yet to find skeletons of grizzlies and brown bears in the woods. And he did most of his stuff in British Columbia and Vancouver Island. And so that's like, there's tons of bears and grizzlies in that area. But he said he's yet to see one, bones or skeleton.
Well, that's the thing. Mother Nature will make a body disappear fast.
Yes.
Way faster than you think. And, the odds are a body doesn't even have to disappear, or, say the skeleton's left behind, because the skeletons, takes the longest thing to disappear, but mice and other rodents will make a skeleton disappear as well.
Yeah.
But once that skeleton gets a little bit weathered and it's not shiny and white anymore, or some leaves and other debris fall on that skeleton and the bones get kind of scattered around, you're probably not even going to notice it anyways.
Right.
I mean, you could walk right by it and not even see it.
You know what? That's a really good point. Yeah. Because I was just blending with the texture of the ground and leaves and sticks and stuff. So yeah.
Well, let's go over some possibilities in terms of Bigfoot and what happens after a Bigfoot dies. Because there's several possibilities. There's stories that kind of support some of them, and then there's things we know about nature that kind of support others. But one of the top questions out there, does Bigfoot bury their dead? What do you think? Do you think they bury the dead?
I would think so. I mean, I mean, being researching in the woods and stuff, I know that they know that I'm there, and they avoid me. They either want me to see them or they don't. So I know they're smart enough to know, hey, someone's got a gun, or hey, someone's got cameras. So I think they're smart enough to elude, video or photography. So I mean, if they're smart enough to do that, I think they're smart enough to, in my opinion, to bury themselves.
Like have some sort of reverence for the dead enough to at least be self-aware enough to bury it to avoid it being discovered by humans or torn apart by animals or whatnot, and who have you.
Yeah. I mean, there's tons of reports on hikers and people seeing Bigfoots either digging or piling rocks upon something that they don't know what it is, but they're piling rocks. And so I find that fascinating to me.
Well, there's a lot of reports also of people stumbling across what appear to be burial sites that they can't attribute to anything else. Now, does that mean it's a Bigfoot burial site? No. But there was a situation in Oklahoma where a location was discovered in a very remote area. I believe you had to climb up a rock face to even access the area. And in this area, there was several, I can't remember the number, 6 to 8 rock piles, elongated, that looked like grave sites. And the people, the researchers at the time that discovered the location, claimed that they could hear limbs breaking and brush thrashing around in the woods around them once they entered this area and discovered it. Like something was upset with them being there, and they didn't stick around to dig around and see what it was or anything.
Right. It felt threatening, almost like kind of pushed them out.
Right. Then you also have reports of people finding basically the same style mounds that Native Americans would create, except much smaller and in the middle of the woods.
And then isn't like some of those reports on areas that don't have or attribute to any like Native American history in that area,
right,
but yet they're there.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was something kind of weird that you and I have discussed before, our common background down in Texas. There is an area that we weren't allowed to go. Mm-hmm. And that particular person who owned the property was basically an amateur archaeologist, I guess you would call him.
Yes.
He liked looking for artifacts, Native American artifacts and things. Mm-hmm. And there was an area that he would not allow anybody to go. He let researchers go all over his property except for this one area.
Yeah.
And all he would say is, we're not allowed there. And I often wondered if he had some sort of possible burial site on his land.
You know what? That is possible. That is possible. And that maybe they were probably communicating to him in a certain way that they didn't want him. Maybe like, putting trees down in a pathway that didn't allow a clear passage or something. I'm not sure, but
I mean, that's speculation, but I had heard stories where certain people were trying to get a bone off of him to have tested, and he refused to do it.
Yeah.
So I often wondered if this mystery bone that he supposedly had was found in that location, and that's why nobody was allowed there.
I could believe it because, the person that we're talking about, he didn't want any notoriety. He didn't want to be put in the public eye. He didn't look for any of that stuff. So for him to protect it, I can believe that it's probably something there.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'm not going to tell anybody where it's at.
Not either. So,
but there's also stories, that are pretty well documented of giant skeletons being found in actual Native American mounds.
I have heard of that.
And supposedly some of them were adorned with different things that would kind of signify them being almost revered as a god type entity. Mm-hmm. Something larger than just a human, not just physically, but in status. And some of those skeletons supposedly went to the Smithsonian or other museums and disappeared. Nobody has any record of them. Nobody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've heard scientists that worked at specific dig sites that were involved in finding these skeletons saying that they were sent off to a museum and then the museum denying having them. So did humans bury Bigfoot in their own burial mounds with them? Or did the Bigfoot place their, deceased in these burial mounds? I don't know. I know there's lots of reports in my own personal experience of Bigfoot hanging around human cemeteries for some reason, especially old cemeteries. Here in Oklahoma, a lot of those cemeteries are Native American cemeteries. And nobody seems to know why they do that.
I know I've said that on my podcast as well, that I've heard stories as well of like Bigfoot's either being sighted in cemeteries or crossing to go to a cemetery or them gathering near a cemetery. I've heard those stories too. And I've always, for some reason, I try to be an open minded and think about, okay, why are they coming in this area? Why? I mean, is there like a waterway there? Was there an old planting a farm there, or were there like a fish hatchery? Something. Mm-hmm. I've always tried to attribute that, and I could never find anything that would link it back to that. So I mean, that's kind of puzzling to me.
It seems to be pretty widespread.
Yeah.
I don't really have an explanation for it. There's, we can speculate and theorize. There's different reasons that might interest them in these areas.
Right.
But a lot of their behavior seems, again, very protective of these areas.
Mm-hmm.
Almost as they have a reverence for them. And to me, that's kind of a check mark in the category of the possibility of them burying their own dead.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why would they care?
I know we talked off show on another show as well about EMF and infrasound, mm-hmm. right? Because some cemeteries, not all of them, will give off EMF, and it's been theorized that Bigfoot can do infrasound, and so I know we talked before about how infrasound and EMF have similar attributes and have effects on people. Do you think, and I'm just thinking outside the box, do you think Bigfoots are possibly attracted to cemeteries that give off EMF or strange vibes, and they're attracted to it because they can also do infrasound?
Well, it's not something I've thought of before.
Right.
But yeah, I think that would be a possibility for sure. If it's something that they use to communicate or something that they use in their daily lives somehow, and you mm-hmm. have an area that's giving off a large amount that's, detectable by them in the area, I would think it would draw them to that. I mean, no different than if you were out in the woods and you heard music playing, you would go see the source of the music.
Mm-hmm.
Because we would recognize music for what it is and be like, okay, why is that out there? Is somebody else out here with me? I need to go check. So that's an interesting theory for sure.
Yeah.
I wonder what, I don't have the answer to any of this, but like gravestones and things like that, some of the areas, I wonder what kind of minerals you have there, if you have some quartz deposits going on or something.
Limestone or underwater tributary or something, right?
Yeah, right.
Huh.
Something to think about.
Bigfoot for thought.
So I actually have a list of that I shared with you as well, of some reports of burials, people claiming to have seen Bigfoot in the process of burying other Bigfoot. And there's something that really stood out to me. All of them, but I think one of them involved 3 Bigfoot with a 4th deceased Bigfoot.
I did notice that too, yeah.
And I think one of them had 4 Bigfoot and then a deceased Bigfoot. But all the rest were 3 and then 1 deceased. And
like almost like a ceremony type, right?
Yeah. And I thought that was really strange. And even the person who collected this information eventually pointed it out, in their conclusions or whatever. And I thought that was really weird. I had never really paid attention to that whenever I was reading stories or anything, but seeing them all collected in one spot like that, it was like, one after another. In the Pacific Northwest, a man witnessed 3 Bigfoots digging a hole with their hands to bury a 4th Bigfoot. Afterward, they rolled rocks on the grave. That one was reported by Roger Patterson. You may have heard of him.
Yes.
All of these are older reports. They're all from people, mostly people. I recognize some of the names like Peter Byrne, Ray Crow, Roger Patterson, obviously. This was how people shared reports back in the day. They came through the mail, and these guys would go out and actually take the reports in person, or they would dig them out of old newspaper archives or journals. It was very old school research, and a lot of this stuff is going to get lost. But here's one from Peter Byrne. From northern Washington State, a man witnessed 3 Bigfoots burying a 4th one. Location unknown. Before 1975, 3 Bigfoots were witnessed digging a hole with their hands to bury a 4th Bigfoot. When the hole was filled in, huge boulders were rolled over the site. That one was reported by Glenn Thomas. It just goes on and on and on and on. There's like a couple pages here of different reports of burials, most of them being 3 and 4 Bigfoot. To me, with the use of rocks being used on top of the grave sites, obviously Native Americans, Old West, the reason for the rocks were to keep scavengers from digging into the graves.
Right.
Something Bigfoot would have probably learned as well. But all of this, to me, burying a body goes further as far as spirituality and mental aptitude and intelligence. And I mean, it denotes a belief system.
It does. And that's, I wouldn't say it's scary, but it's good to know that they, I mean, cause the way I look at Bigfoots is that I feel that I'm really close to them. But at the same time, I've always wanted them to be real. That I've never seen one. And for hear stories like this, it makes me feel like that they're real. I mean, they're real, and they have souls, they have hearts, they have feelings. And so to me, it touches me a little bit, cause I've always been fascinated with like Bigfoot stories on behavior. And so I clumped this in with behavior.
Right. This one was interesting to me in Oregon. A bulldozer driver was building a road in the forest. He ran the road through an area of large stones in a circle 20 feet in diameter with smaller stones in the middle. The next day he would come back and all the stones were replaced in their original positions after he had bulldozed them away.
Yeah.
This went on for some time and eventually he built the road around the area. Stones in a circle. I mean, yeah. You're laying out patterns and everything. That goes straight into spirituality.
It does. I mean, he's like the bulldozer guy's lucky he didn't. That's all he got was stones put back.
Yeah. He's lucky none stuck around to return the stones the next day.
Yeah.
But let's say Bigfoot didn't originally put the stones there. Let's say he ran across a Native American site, mm-hmm. What was putting the rocks back the next day? What has hands and can move these stones and put them back the way they were after he goes through and bulldozes them out of the way? And,
right.
And why would they do that?
I mean, I'm assuming, number one, that those, if you're going to bulldoze rocks, the rocks are probably pretty big and probably pretty heavy, and a regular human can't do it. So if you have to bulldoze rocks, whatever's putting them back is probably pretty big. So,
this one I wanted to mention because I found an aspect of it interesting. From 1990, out of Oregon, a hunter claimed that he found a dead baby Bigfoot 10 feet up in a tree.
Yeah, I was reading that one. That one was go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and he was originally attracted to the tree because he said there was large piles of scat around the base of the tree. Now, he goes on to claim that, it was the mother grieving for the infant that was up in the tree. I don't know if, these are just little snippets. So I don't know in the original report if this is something he observed or why he believed this or if he was just guessing. But he claimed that there is this baby Bigfoot, basically 10 feet up in this evergreen tree, and it had been concealed with boughs of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
And that he took the body out of the tree and actually contacted officials. And first he called Portland State University and told them that he had found a dead baby Bigfoot, and they all laughed at him and said they weren't interested because, Bigfoot doesn't exist. And,
I don't know if I believe that, but
yeah. But supposedly, he took the body home and put it in his deep freezer. So what happened to it? If this is a true story,
yeah.
What happened to the body? What in a deep freeze? That's not the first time we've heard a freezer Bigfoot story, but
that's true about that. Yeah, that story was reported by Ray Nab.
Yeah. And
come on, Ray, get in, do some research, find the baby Bigfoot.
Well, tree burials were something that some Native Americans did.
Yeah, they did.
To me, it was more similar to like a Viking type funeral or a funeral pyre or whatever, but they didn't set it on fire. I don't think they would just put them in trees or build these platforms out of trees and put them out there. But I still found that interesting.
You think it's possible that these Bigfoots have, they paid attention to, Native American ceremonies and just kind of mimicked it a little bit?
Man, you know what? I do. One of the first thoughts I ever had in this crazy rabbit hole,
mm-hmm.
a long time ago, I learned that the reason a lot of Native Americans had long fringe on their clothing was because it allowed them to stalk through tall grass quieter. Because as the fringe drags through the grass raises back up more slowly and quieter and allows them to stalk their prey easier.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it reminded me of the hair hanging off the arms and legs of a Bigfoot.
I could see that.
I always wondered if Native Americans got that idea from Bigfoot. And
I could totally see that.
And you hear these stories of, at some point in time, Native Americans commonly interacting with Bigfoot. Some reports of them even trading with Bigfoot, bartering with them on occasion. Native Americans would often have their own gardens on their property, but would also have a second garden out by the tree line for the Bigfoot to come and get those vegetables, so they'd leave their garden alone. So I think that it's very possible that at some point in time, before, us white guys got here, that Bigfoot and Native Americans had some sort of coexisting relationship going on and learned off of one another.
Man, that's, I could totally see that, because they respect the land, and Bigfoot's on the land. So
yeah. So now let's go the complete opposite direction. The other one that people often question: are Bigfoot cannibals? Do they eat their dead?
I've never heard of a story of that. Have you?
I've never heard of a report or a story involving someone observing Bigfoot eating another Bigfoot. Yet it comes up time and time again whenever posed with the question, what do they do with the dead bodies? Well, they just eat them. I mean, they're opportunists.
Yeah, I get that.
There are some animals out there known to science that do that. Primarily predators and scavengers, and a few that, you might find surprising, like rabbits and stuff. But I don't think Bigfoot would do that.
I don't either. I mean, because you would hear some story, whether it be Native American or somebody else from another continent regarding this, but I don't recall ever even thinking that idea at all.
I mean, you got the Native American myth of the Wendigo.
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess, First Nations myth of the Wendigo, wherever it originated. And there's different interpretations of the Wendigo, or different descriptions of the Wendigo. Mm-hmm. But one of the common descriptions is very much like a Bigfoot type creature. And the basis of the myth is basically cannibalism. If if a human eats the flesh of another human, they turn into this creature.
Right.
And then in some cases, this creature is depicted as a Bigfoot type creature. I don't know where that came from. Because there's so many different descriptions and versions of the Wendigo in modern, culture, that I don't know what the original description was. I don't know why they would make it look like a Bigfoot creature, or, obviously the lesson was don't eat dead people.
Right.
But either way, I think Bigfoot would be intelligent enough to at least think on some level that if something dies, there might be something wrong with it, so I probably shouldn't eat it.
Yeah. Yeah, I could totally see that as well. I want to backtrack a little bit. My only history about the Wendigo was reading through Marvel Comics when I first started reading comic books. Mm-hmm. And you remember the story of the Hulk fighting the Wendigo, and Wolverine steps in, and I think that's Hulk 182. I think
Hulk 181 and 182.
181, 182. Okay. So I remember reading the backstory on that one, I think, and he appears on Alpha Flight comic books as well. Mm-hmm. about it being a Native American curse upon like a white settler that may have like hurt one of their family members of the tribe and stuff. So whenever I was young, that's what I automatically thought of was a curse of the Wendigo and cannibalism and all that stuff. So I mean, it was an aspect that was kind of scary for me at first growing up, but then you kind of do the research and you kind of it's not really a cannibal, but
yeah, I don't think a lot of people put it in the category of a cryptid these days, and to me, it's not in the category of a cryptid. Nowhere related to cryptids at all. But a lot of people put them there. A lot of people put antlers and deer skulls on them instead.
Yeah.
So who knows?
I think that's just ghoulish art.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, there are obviously a lot of reports of Bigfoot eating roadkill, seen on the side of the road, apparently eating roadkill. There was a story, I think, out of Texas, as a matter of fact, where Bigfoot was taking roadkill out of the back of a pickup truck of a guy that collected it for the highway department or something. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think I recall that story. Yeah, I do recall hearing about that story too. So,
I mean, I guess they'll eat roadkill, but I just don't think they would do it to their own.
No, I don't think so either. There's so much stuff in even like in rural America. There's like I was saying before, there's fish hatcheries, there's farms, there's farm animals, there's taco mayo cups.
Yeah.
So there's dumpsters. I mean, I've heard of Bigfoots going behind a casino and drinking out of a grease pit.
It happens.
Or going behind a Campbell's soup factory and rummaging through dumpsters. I mean, there's so many other aspects of food. I mean, and resources that I think they just hold each other very, very close and dear. And I just don't see it. I've never heard of it, so I don't believe it.
Well, it's our understanding that across the board, to summarize, not to speak for you, but what you're saying, cannibalism is a last-ditch resort to survive.
Yeah.
When there's no other options left. And these things have plenty of options.
Mm-hmm.
So just to eat the dead to explain that that's where the bodies go, I don't think so.
I mean, I would think, Matt, that you would hear just at least one story, whether it be like in the 1800s or the 1950s or even in current today. You would hear one story of someone saying, hey, I saw two Bigfoots fighting, the other one killed it and started eating it.
Yeah.
But you don't hear any of that.
I saw one chewing an arm.
Yeah.
Nothing. So here's an interesting one that I've heard very few reports about, but I have heard a couple. What do you think about the possibility of them using waterways to conceal the dead bodies? Like either sinking the dead bodies to the ground underneath the water or digging out the side of like a riverbed and putting them under there.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I mean, to me, that's concealment. I mean, they use waterways to walk. They use, they use that to travel. I've always believed that. And so I could totally see that happening, them hiding the body or even transporting the body or moving a body fast.
Water will make a body disappear in a hurry.
It will.
Yes, we find dead bodies in rivers and creeks and lakes and everything else when we're looking for them. On rare occasion, we just find them randomly. But there's actually a pretty short window of time to find that body just floating at the surface. A lot of times they're not found floating at the surface when we find them. We actually hook them or something and drag them up.
Yeah.
But Bigfoot could easily lodge a body under a log or weigh it down with some big rocks or something, and that thing would never come up.
Mm-hmm.
And fish and turtles and crawdads and everything else would take care of it.
Yep.
It could dig out the side of a riverbank and shove it underneath there and put the mud back in there, and you'll never find it, unless it happens to get washed out. But how often would that happen?
Very far and few between, probably.
So if you find a Bigfoot in the bottom of your swimming pool, you know what happened.
It conceals it well.
Another one that people bring up, caves. People like to go to caves to explain Bigfoot, period. Yeah. Why can't you find them? Because they live in caves. Where are they at during the day? They're in their caves.
They're underground.
They're underground. Oklahoma doesn't have a lot of big caves. None that I've seen, naturally, that haven't been turned into tourist spots or whatever.
Right.
I don't think caves are just that prolific. I know there's a lot of caves. Okay. Before I hear it, I know that there's listeners out there. There's caves everywhere, man. You don't know what you're talking about.
No, there's channels.
Yeah, man. They go everywhere, man. You can get from California to Utah in a cave. But if you're having to crawl through the entrance at normal size human,
right?
A Bigfoot clan ain't crawling up in there, man.
They can't squeeze through it. They can't.
They're not doing it.
Yeah.
They're just not doing it. It's dark. There's nothing to eat in there. The water that's in there is probably bad. It's dangerous. I just don't see caves being the answer. However, I can understand a dead Bigfoot being thrown in the back of a cave.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense that way,
Yeah. And there have been some strange discoveries in caves. The giant skeletons or skulls found with double rows of teeth or whatever, the red-haired giants.
Mm-hmm.
Those were found in caves, I believe. So caves as a burial system? Possibly.
Or even like a hiding point for them to move it from one location to another.
Yeah.
So
if nothing else, a place to put the bones. Boy, that would be scary. Can you imagine crawling into a cave and finding a bunch of giant skeletons in there?
And then saying, you know what? It's time to leave.
Time to go.
Before someone shows up.
That would be terrifying.
It would be. Because I'm kind of claustrophobic a little bit. So, yeah, that wouldn't work for me.
So here's one that animals do all the time. They know when they're dying, and they just go off into an area that they can't be found and die.
Yeah, elephants do that, right?
Yeah.
Elephants, dogs.
Yeah, the myth of the elephant graveyard, where all elephants go to die.
Good old Johnny Weissmuller.
Yeah.
Love him.
But lots of animals do this. They just go to an area where they can't be accessed because they're worried about predators getting them.
Mm-hmm.
And they burrow up in these areas and they just wait for sweet death. I mean, I think that's a good possibility as well.
Yeah.
They already live in remote areas that most humans don't access anyways. And then maybe after they die, their loved ones come in and do something with the body.
Yeah, I could, that's definitely a possibility. I mean, because I don't know. I mean, no one's been able to find Bigfoot bones right in the open. So yeah, I mean, to me, that's plausible.
We also have to think about, a missing component to all of this. I would assume these things don't have any predators.
No, they're top of the chain.
Right. So how often do they die?
Dang, I never thought of it that way. Yeah, you're right.
If you're living in the wild and there's nothing out there hunting you for a food source, I mean, other than disease or old age or some random accident.
accident. Yeah.
You know, nothing's going to happen to you. So, you know, they could have a very long lifespan as far as we know. And they just don't die that often.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories of people saying that some Bigfoots, you know, having different colors and then having a trace of white on them. So yeah, I mean, I totally believe that.
Do you think the hair colors change with age on these creatures?
I would think so. I mean, doesn't there was somebody telling me a story about it. I can't remember who it was, but she was saying that she had an incident where she saw a Bigfoot when she was young, and then she thought she saw the same one as she's older, and she saw, you know, noticed that it looked a little weathered, and so yeah, I could totally believe that.
I read one report that took place just north of the Oklahoma border with Kansas, where a motorist had trapped on an isolated stretch of highway to relieve themselves. And there was an overpass or something. They went down the embankment, and underneath this overpass, they claimed to have seen a younger Bigfoot. I say younger. They described it as like 3.5, 4 feet tall, I think.
That's pretty young or short.
But they claimed that it was solid white. And that's the only report that I can recall of what seemed to be a younger one with that hair color.
That is odd.
Now, at nighttime, maybe it wasn't white. Maybe it was light gray. Maybe it was blonde. But it wasn't dark. You know, It was a lighter hair color. But that's the only report I can recall of it.
Kansas, huh?
Kansas. Not expecting that one, were you?
No, I was not.
So the last one that I could come up with as an explanation is just nature. Natural decomposition.
Yeah.
It takes out everything else that's out there.
You got ants, you got, you know, raccoons, wolves, coyotes. Yeah.
Plants. Worms.
You know, yeah. Mold, all kinds of stuff.
I mean, how much wildlife is there in the United States that dies on a daily basis? I would guess millions. And you don't just walk through the woods kicking dead bodies out of the way.
No.
You don't hardly ever find anything out in the woods.
Nature moves fast.
Yeah. And if you're an expert at hiding and avoiding humans, you're probably not going to be found. So do you think Bigfoot have, I can't say ability, but do you think they grieve the loss of one another?
You know, according to some of those reports that we were reading, I think there was a couple where hikers, either eyewitnesses or hikers, were saying that some of the Bigfoots that were in supposedly like a burial ceremony or a burial situation said that they looked like they were sad. And I mean, I haven't run into a lot of incidents or reports where because I've been fascinated with emotion, like a behavior and emotion. And so anytime I would get a report of someone doing a Bigfoot doing like emotion of, you know, doing their face or a frown or anything like that, it's always captured me. So according to like you were saying, some of those reports, there was a couple saying that they actually looked sad, and it didn't describe how they look. You know, like it was, you know, shoulders slumped and, or, you know, a frown or nothing like that. So I can believe it.
I mean, you know, I guess it depends on who you ask, but I mean, there are wildlife biologists out there who've written research papers on it, that there's a lot of animals out there that seem to show grievance towards the deceased. I mean, it's a big list, more so than I ever thought. I mean, you got elephants, whales, orcas, chimps, and gorillas. Lots of primates do it. Some birds do it. Even peccaries, like the little pigs out in the desert, grieve the loss of their own kind. There's all kinds of stories. I mean, it's well documented, especially with primates, where like a mother loses an infant and she'll carry it around like it's still alive for days, sometimes weeks on end.
Yeah.
An interesting thing happened down in Texas, as a matter of fact. Lori Hood, you may know her as Lauren Smith's mother. She had a Chihuahua, and this dog got hit by a car out in front of her house. And she said that after the dog had gotten hit, I can't remember if she buried it there on the property or what, but she had active Bigfoot activity taking place at her house on a regular basis. But she claimed that the Bigfoot, or something that she attributed to Bigfoot, were basically making mournful sounds that night that the dog had died. Almost in reverence for her or whatever. I've also heard a story about someone who was feeding Bigfoot at their house, an elderly person. She was taken to a hospital. This was on Native American land. And I think she died at the hospital, but she never returned home. And according to members of the tribe, the Bigfoot were heard mourning her death around her house.
That's it. That's interesting.
Yeah. Making very sad and sorrowful cries, more moaning sounds instead of screaming and growling and things like that. I don't know how you determine,
right, what's mournful or what's not.
Right, but there are reports out there of these creatures mourning the loss of animals and humans. Do you think that's a possibility, or is this just wishful thinking, or folk tales, or what is it?
Right. I know from my own research in Texas, we've talked about this on your show before about whenever I was in the field, I would leave like food or items that I wanted to trade. I would leave them in certain parts of the woods and like in crooks of trees. And then when I would like go back and like return like a day later, they would leave like a shiny rock or some herbs or like a dead bird or something. So if they're willing to trade stuff like that with me, I could see how they would care. They would care for either myself or someone else or even their own kind. So to me, yeah, I mean, that sounds like something that they're capable of doing.
I mean, the more you start putting these little pieces together, if you follow this train of thought, that they most likely bury their dead. They've been seen putting rocks on top of the graves. If it's true that there's normally 3 of them involved in burying a 4th one, then you look at their behavior and how they interact with humans. And then you look at their ability or the fact that they grieve and they mourn their own loss. They have reverence for the dead. They're self-aware, and they can even be mournful of the loss of a different species. More and more, it starts to paint a picture of something that's definitely not an animal.
I'd have to agree with you, because it seems like the case with Miss Hood, that this Bigfoot was obviously paying attention to what was going on at her house and was noticing stuff. It was not too far away, and was able to see what happened and see her burying her dog and stuff. So I mean, yeah, I mean that's, to me, that's a characteristic of caring, of being thoughtful, of just opening up to communications. So
yeah, I mean, you normally hear reports of them killing dogs, or dogs disappearing, or people feeding them for a long time and then it stops and they come and tear up the house or the property, or stand out there and scream or whatever. You usually hear the opposite, but you also hear these counterbalancing stories on the other side, although not as often.
Mm-hmm.
But even on the other side of the behavior, if you look at the more violent behavior, that tends to note anger and frustration. And those are still emotions. Those are still human emotions. It just seems to start painting a picture that these things are more like humans than a lot of people want to give them credit for.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, to me, some people might think that's scary, but I mean, I don't see it that way. I see it as they're closer to us than most people think.
One of the first stories that I ever heard involving any of this, and involving how Bigfoot react to a deceased one or to each other, Ape Canyon.
Yes.
One of the most famous stories out there. And it all starts with a Bigfoot being shot and most likely killed. And then the Bigfoot come back later on that night and attack the cabin of the miners responsible for the incident.
Revenge
over a deceased one.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have a story that from modern times that a lot of Bigfooters are familiar with, the siege at Honubby, where a couple brothers, a Bigfoot was raiding the deep freeze on the property. The deep freeze was kept outside, as is the case in a lot of rural areas. They got tired of the deep freeze being raided, so they put a lock on it. And the Bigfoot got mad and started attacking or aggressively behaving on the property to the house, scaring children on the property. And it ultimately led to one of the brothers shooting at and claiming to have struck one of the Bigfoot. The body was not recovered. After knowing one of the brothers involved and getting to know him quite well over the years, and talking to him privately, he told me that the Bigfoot that was injured had that the property, the cabin, was on the side of a mountain, and the Bigfoot had gone kind of down in the ravine behind the house into the deep brush. And that him and his brother would go down there trying to find it. They could hear it gasping for air as it's dying. And they were trying to end it. And they killed a monster,
Yeah.
But other Bigfoot came to the aid of that Bigfoot and would throw rocks at them and throw sticks at them and keep them from getting to it. And eventually started running around, supposedly grabbing different, I don't know, herbs, vegetation, whatever you want to call it. Like they are gathering up some
medicine.
Some medicine. I don't have another explanation for it. That's how it was described. And helped the Bigfoot get out of there and cross the road and go on up the mountain. and that there was another witness, a truck driver, driving down the road, saw the Bigfoot as they were trying to cross the road, and the brothers tried to flag him down and get him to stop, but he wouldn't stop. And
I wouldn't stop either.
Yeah, but forever they've been trying to find that truck driver because he's the one person that can confirm their story, you know?
Right.
But here you have, you know, this report and this story that a lot of people are familiar with, but a lot of people aren't familiar with the part where the Bigfoot went around and helped the other Bigfoot escape.
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting.
That shows emotion and caring and just, you know, love. To me, that indicates love to me.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've always been interested in, and that kind of behavior. So, man.
Then you have a story that became very famous, the bug story.
Yes.
Now, you know probably more details about that story than I do.
Yeah.
Didn't you do a show about it?
I did do a show about it. It was actually one of the shows that when I first got into, you know, to the TBRC at the time, Luke had told us about this. It was going to be on Coast to Coast. And at that time, Coast to Coast was on like at 2 a.m, 1 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And they were broadcasting it, and I stayed up to listen to that show. And that show is, to me, I was amazed at the time, and I'm still amazed about it. But that supposedly that story was told by a gentleman that didn't want to say his real name, and his partners. They were hunting. They were hunting on a truck that had big spotlights, and they were hunting. They were shooting like coyote and whatever that was in the area, and they were making money that way. They were making, and so according to them, pelts back then were ranchers in the local area were paying them just to kill off coyotes and wolves or whatever that was in the area. And so supposedly they ran across a Bigfoot, and they thought it was a bear. And so once they thought it was a bear, they wanted to, you know, hey, the price goes up a little higher. So they just shot at it. And to me, I think Robert W. Morgan was also on that episode, and he was kind of questioning the guy on, because you saw something tall and you're a Vietnam, because the guy was a Vietnam vet, and he shot at this thing and he goes, this tall stood up. He says, well, didn't you think it was a human? So Robert W. Morgan was pretty hard on this guy. And so, but he said he thought it was a bear. It was a bear standing up. And so they shot at it, and apparently it ran off, and they went after it and went into a briar patch to hide. And so the only way you could get into this briar patch is that you had to crawl in a really small space. So Bugs apparently crawled in there with a 44 and shot it up close, and there was a female in there with him, and he shot the female as well. And he did it like indicate that it had organs like a male and a female, and they end up burying those bodies in a shallow grave. And he had the map to it, and he knows where they're at. And he gave it to Art Bell at the time. And when he died, he said he wanted Art Bell to know where these bodies were at. So it was an interesting story.
Didn't he say something about they decided to bury the bodies because they thought they were human?
Yes, they thought it was human, and they were afraid to be prosecuted, and they didn't want to chance it, so they buried the bodies.
And then Art Bell gets fired from Coast to Coast, or has a disagreement and leaves, or whatever happens. Bugs dies. Treasure map to Bigfoot bodies never resurfaces.
Nope. But I tell you what, it was that story was pretty intriguing at the time, because I think, you know, you hear stories about Bigfoots getting shot at, but to have a story currently, like within, you know, your lifetime, that to me was amazing.
Yeah, the bug story was huge when it happened. Huge. I mean, back then, like Coast to Coast was the show. Mm-hmm. You know, and anytime they were talking about Bigfoot, it was a big deal for some of us. And
yes,
the bug story, Oh, somebody shot 2 Bigfoot. Oh, they're they know where the bodies are. Like, and then again, it comes out to be nothing, just disappears. I wonder who has the map.
I think Bugs' wife had a copy of it, but I don't know if she's still alive.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because if he's a Vietnam veteran, he's already pretty old.
Yeah.
So
that'd be something if it turned out to be true.
It would be.
So then you have another incident in our Bigfoot generation.
Mm-hmm.
A guy by the name of Justin Smaha.
Yeah.
Shows up on a taxidermy website asking about Bigfoot. Claiming he shot and killed a juvenile Bigfoot.
He choked it too, right?
He shot it and it was dying, and maybe he put his boot on its throat until it died or something.
What do you think about that story?
I don't know. The biggest hang up I have is there's a researcher out there I have a huge amount of respect for. I always have. Bart Catino.
Mm-hmm.
Bart is a straight up stand up guy. Everybody that knows Bart sees him that way. And I've talked to him in depth about this, and Bart's got some kids, precious kids, and Bart's biggest thing in life is being their dad. And he told me if this wasn't true and I knew it wasn't true, and I've put all this info out there in public about saying it's true, and my kids got older and found out that their dad was a liar, it would devastate me. He's like, there's no way I'm getting on the internet and lying about anything, because I don't want my kids to ever think that their dad was a liar, because I'm not.
I get that. But, was he there with Justin when it happened?
No, he was not. But here's the deal.
Mm-hmm.
So Bart pretty much, it went through a series of different researchers.
Mm-hmm.
But Bart ended up kind of like the main researcher. And there was another guy involved that was there that day, who was Justin's best friend at the time, but never wanted to be involved in the story. Didn't want to have anything to do with it. Didn't want to be on camera.
Didn't want his name associated with it?
Didn't want his name associated with it, and supposedly quit being friends with Justin over it. Or at least isn't best friends with him like they used to be. At the time, Bart had Justin and this guy over at his house because he was meeting them and he was going to question them. Bart says they were out on his back deck, which is elevated off the back of the house. And they were back there. I think he went inside to get him some beers or something. And he says he snuck out the front and snuck around the side of the house and hid underneath the porch and listened to them talking to one another without them knowing he was there.
Mm-hmm.
And that the whole time he was listening, they completely stuck to their story and stayed in character, so to speak. And were discussing details of the story, back and forth about, what happened that day. Not remember to say this or anything, but
they were just talking about
talking about it, waiting for him to come back with the beer. And that's why, that was the part where, that pretty much sealed it for him. Because he was they didn't know I was there. They never knew I was there. They, I don't know if he ever told them. And he was there is no reason. If they had been making this up, they would have been talking about getting their story straight and everything. And but it was like they were just conversating about the events. So I don't know.
Well, so when this happened, and I'm just going to be devil's advocate here. When this happened, they did a documentary, right? Someone did a documentary.
Yes, someone did a documentary.
And then he did a reality show, right?
Yeah. Later on, he was part of a reality show.
That he won, correct?
No.
He didn't win that one?
No.
Okay. I mean, if you actually kill a Bigfoot, I'm just thinking outside the box. If you kill a Bigfoot, do you do all that stuff? Do you do documentary? Do you go on a reality show?
I don't know.
I mean, that's just, to me, I find it hard to believe. That's just me, the way I see it. I mean, you obviously know the players and you've talked to them a great deal, but me on the outside, I'm going to say that I'm not sure if I believe that story, but that's just me.
I'm not saying I believe the story. I'm just saying I have a hard time saying I don't believe the story because
Anyway, sorry.
I mean, people that know Justin claim that he's a good guy and just a down-to-earth guy and a humble guy and serial killer type that lives next door, I guess. I don't know. I don't know. Like, he's been on other documentaries, like real documentaries, not just, there was a documentary made about his story.
Right.
But then he's been in other documentaries as well that were like scientific documentaries about Bigfoot, where they're doing real research and everything. He got out of the Bigfoot world in a hurry.
Yeah.
He didn't ever try to make any money off of it. Like, it wasn't him, trying to put out a documentary and make money off of it. I mean, it's another one of those things where it's just like,
okay,
his entire story sounds like bullshit. You know, he has no way of proving any of it. And he's kind of a jerk, to strangers. But there doesn't seem to be any motive, and he's never once strayed from his story. I mean, he said he shot a juvenile. He had a crazy story. He described it in detail. Put the body underneath a bunch of brush. It snowed real bad. Went back with Bobo. I don't know, man. Body gone.
Right.
And he did pass a polygraph test.
Okay, well.
But so did Bob Hieronymus, saying that he wore the Patty costume. So, I don't know, man. I don't know.
It's either he's a really good actor.
Could be.
And he's lying.
He's got talent,
Yeah.
He should try out sometime.
So I guess he did choke a Bigfoot.
I guess he really did choke a Bigfoot.
Would you ever consider him coming on to your show?
If he wanted to tell it again.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody that's got a story, I'm open for them being on the show and sharing their story.
Right.
I like to provide a platform for people to do that, including him or anybody else that says they shot a Bigfoot.
Right.
Which brings me to my last story, another claim of shooting a Bigfoot, the GCBRO.
Good old GC.
Do you remember whenever they said that they shot and killed a Bigfoot, or at least shot one?
You know what? At the time, and I'll be honest with you, when I was with the TBRC, I wouldn't say they were our rivals, but they made it pretty clear that they didn't like anything that we were doing or our philosophy. So to be honest with you, I didn't really pay attention to a lot what they were doing.
Well, the GCBRO's whole thing, their whole shtick,
right?
They're bringing in a body. That's the only way to prove it, and that's all they're interested in doing.
Yeah, because their website used to have like flashing red and yellow.
Yeah,
that it would whenever you would click on it, it would say, we're gonna shoot one, we're gonna kill one, all this stuff. So yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Their Angel Fire website. Yeah. But that was their whole thing. They weren't interested in research. They had a piece of property, or somebody's mother-in-law had a piece of property or something that they called Monster Central, and this property had Bigfoot activity on it. I know lots of people that I trust their opinions say they've had experiences there. I don't know if it should hold the title Monster Central or not. I don't even think they have access to it anymore. But they didn't have outings. They had hunts where they would have people come with guns and try to kill a Bigfoot. And on one of these big hunts that they had, supposedly, I believe the guy was from Oklahoma, as a matter of fact, shot a Bigfoot. And I think he was in a deer stand, and he shot it with a shotgun. And supposedly gut shot it, hit it in the stomach.
Was a slug, I hope?
I don't know. I never found out those details. Blood everywhere, you know. It's the middle of the night. They're trying to track it. It's getting too dark. They can't find it. They're going to wait until morning and start over at daylight, and couldn't ever find the body. The trail just disappeared. Supposedly, hair and tissue and blood samples were taken, and they sent them off for DNA testing, and all of this is going to be released in their newsletter that you got to subscribe to. You have to pay to get the newsletter, but they're going to release all this information in this newsletter.
That's a dead giveaway there. Yeah. No pun intended.
And people subscribed, people paid, people waited and waited. And as far as I know, people are still waiting for those results to come in. This happened a decade ago, maybe longer, and probably longer. Results never came out. No answer as to why not. I don't know what happened. You know, everybody always says that they're going to change the Bigfoot world and that they've got the proof, and then nothing happens. They were part of a TV show, Killing Bigfoot, I think was the name of it.
Yeah.
Didn't go over real well.
No.
I know they went to the Honubby Bigfoot conference one year and gave a presentation, and people just started attacking them for trying to kill a Bigfoot.
Yeah, I can see that happening. I can totally see that happening.
Well, I mean, even if you think that the only way to prove Bigfoot's existence is with a body, don't go out telling people that you're going to shoot one.
I was gonna say that too, because like I know I'm not for killing the Bigfoot, but if you were to classify the animal, that's the only way they're going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So,
but the way that the political climate has changed in America, so has the Bigfoot community climate.
Yep.
And it's just not a popular stance to have that you're actively trying to shoot and kill a Bigfoot to prove that it's real.
You know, I get it. They're trying to be real. I get it. But, you know, I just wouldn't do that. You wouldn't get any cooperation from anybody, you know, at all.
No.
So.
Not from Bigfoot Crossroads.
Not from Bigfoot Club. So.
Got any closing arguments?
I don't. I mean, I've always been, you know, the only thing I would say, I've always been interested in behavior, and so this kind of lumps it into you know, Bigfoot stuff, you know, Bigfoot's mourning and dying, so that's always clumped into it, so I've always been interested in it.
I want to know what the listeners think. Shoot me a message or an email, bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com. Leave a comment on YouTube, on the podcast. You can find it on any podcast platform that you listen to. Where can they find Bigfoot Club? Oh yeah, the same places.
They can go to bigfootclubpodcast.com, and we're on all the platforms as well.
Or bigfootcrossroads.com, and I'll get your message to Bob for you.
Or if you want to reach out, you know, to Bigfoot Club about Bigfoot Crossroads, I'll get it over to Matt as well too.
Bob, it's been a blast. Thank you for joining me. I sincerely appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
I did. Anytime you want me back, man, I'm ready for you. I'm ready to come back.
Sounds good. Like I said, shoot me an email at bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com if you've had a sighting or an encounter that you want to talk about. Doesn't have to be Bigfoot. I'll talk to you about anything, any paranormal event, anything that scared you. You never know. If you want to reach out to find some help with an encounter you've had, I can hook you up with a researcher in your area, or will do my best to do so. If you haven't subscribed or followed or liked or whatever, do so now. Follow me over to YouTube, subscribe over there, leave a comment, give me a thumbs up. I appreciate all the support. And as always, thanks for listening to Bigfoot Crossroads.